Hi there, if we've never met before, my name's Sunila, and if we have met before, welcome back to this little weird corner of the internet. I just want to quickly apologize to you all if I sound kind of funny at some points. I'm sick again, so that's fun. I'm kind of surprised I found another ROM hack to make a video about so quickly. There have been quite a few releases in the ROM hacking community that are just rehashes of old formulas. Not saying there's like anything wrong with doing something that's been done before, but when I saw the description for Pokemon Record Keepers, it piqued my interest quite a bit. I vibe checked the posts I see, I'm giving them the side eye. I see what kind of word choice they use, are there any fun pictures, and of course, is the features list interesting? And needless to say, obviously, since we're both here right now, Record Keepers checked all the boxes on my very subjective and arbitrary checklist. The original post talked about a new and innovative battle system. Like, okay, so a new battle system, I'm sold. What did they call it? Isometric battling? No, that sounds pretentious. What does that even mean? Asymmetrical, that makes a lot more sense. They also talked about new moves and abilities, and then obviously when you take a look at the screenshots, the art is amazing. There's also a bit of story to go along with it too, which is always nice. In Pokemon Record Keepers, we play as a girl named Tiana, who just recently graduated record keeping school. She partied a little bit too hard according to her teacher, mentor. I'm not really sure who she is, but her name is Satsuki. Tiana is a bit carefree and not so serious about her future prospects as a record keeper. It's kind of nice to have a bit of a more laid back main character as opposed to your typical shonen hero. We chat with Satsuki a bit, and this is where we learn that our job entails us going into historical simulations provided by the Bodhi tree. That's this cool looking tree here. Apparently the Bodhi tree is a real thing. Did you know that? Anyway, while in the simulations, we're meant to make notes of what we see, hence the whole like record keeping thing. It sounds kind of silly, but even though the overworld is just the library that we work for, the world building is really well thought out. There are NPCs to chat with, and as you meet certain requirements, the library gains new folks to talk with, and their stories change based on your progression. Now, as a record keeper, we partake in battles, and that's what helps us through the simulations. The battle system itself is unique, but the best way I can describe the gameplay loop is a battle simulator. Before you enter the Bodhi tree, you can pick which preset you'd like to use, and there are 3 different difficulties, which are called styles. Presets will determine what type of Pokemon you receive. They're built around different types of weather comps. For example, the Sun preset may give you access to Pokemon like Torkoal and Leafeon. As for the styles, Grace gives you one Pokemon that has an ability that sets up weather once it enters battle. Favor gives you a Pokemon that has a move that will set up weather after certain conditions are met. And then Prayer has a Pokemon that's a manual weather setter. So you pick your preset, for example, Sun, and then you choose which style, like Favor. This system's really unique, and each time you enter any of the 3 simulations, your team changes a bit, so you might end up running with a slightly different team each time, even if you pick the same preset and style. Once you're happy with your setup, you can pick between 3 different lore simulations, which will determine what story you get to read at the end when you return to the library, and which simulation boss you'll encounter. Within each simulation, there are 9 mini boss battles. You get to choose which battle you'd like to take part in by approaching these art pieces, and they each have a handful of different mythical and legendary Pokemon to choose from. You don't need to challenge any of these battles to fight the final boss. You can just run in with the team you have if you'd like. No guarantees on winning. Within each mini boss domain, there are 3 Pokemon you can choose to fight before the mini boss. Each of these Pokemon will give you a move that you can teach to any of your Pokemon. You'll see that these moves have a plus at the end. In addition to their normal effects, each move will also add a buff of some kind to your Pokemon. Some may increase HP, while another may increase special attack, speed, or special defense. You can mix and match any moves you'd like on any Pokemon, and it really allows for you to come up with some really fun combinations. Also, each mini boss will give you an ability, and each of your Pokemon can have up to 4. Literally, every Pokemon can learn any available move and can have any available ability. If you're to check out this hack for anything, let it be to see the battle mechanics in action. In each battle, you have the freedom to swap between the 3 Pokemon on your team. There's no taking up a turn to swap out, so if you can imagine the potential team comps you can make when any Pokemon can learn any available move or have access to any ability. It sounds OP, but it's really not. Just trust. There are plenty of times when you'll get a move or an ability and it won't help you out in the slightest. The battle system has what's called the backline, and these are the Pokemon that aren't in the active spot. While a Pokemon is in the backline, they're able to recover their HP. After 3 or more turns in the backline, they'll also begin to recover negative stat changes. After 5 turns, they'll heal most negative stat effects. There are no visible levels in this hack, and stat changes can be stacked up to 6 times. The maximum buff a Pokemon can receive is 2 times its value, while the most a stat can be debuffed is 0.5 times. The enemies in Record Keepers have what's called phases. You phase a Pokemon when you reach the end of one of their health bars. If you attack first and the enemy Pokemon hits the end of its health bar, it'll flinch and not attack. This is definitely something you need to be aware of because it may both help or harm you depending on the battle. There's also this really amazing feature where you can see what move your opponent is going to pick next. You can toggle this on and off, so you don't need to use it if you don't want to, but as someone who usually needs points to write things down to keep track of them. It's so nice to be able to just see what move the opponent is going to choose. Again, it's more of a quality of life thing. You can just toggle it on and off if you'd like. In my opinion, the balancing is surprisingly good, at least on the lower difficulties. It wasn't really good enough to play on the higher difficulties. If you go through the various mini bosses and fight the trash mobs, you'll probably be ready for the simulation boss at the end, but not in a you're guaranteed to win sort of way, but also not in a you're definitely not going to win this unless you're lucky kind of way. I was really surprised I like this hack because normally when it comes to difficulty hacks, I'm not really able to enjoy them because of skill issues, but I was able to make my way through the Grace difficulty without any major problems. That's not to say it's too easy. Honestly, I think because of the freedom you get from being able to pick which weather set you'd like and how you'd like to set the weather up by changing between the 3 different styles, that you get to control how easy or hard the battles are. You can choose to run straight to the boss room, or you can play it safe and fight all 9 mini bosses and 27 sub bosses. I didn't feel like anything was obviously unbalanced, nor did I think anything was unnecessarily hard. I liked all the different moves and abilities you can unlock, and the newly added custom ones are really interesting and change things up even further. And really quick, I would be missing out on something big if I didn't touch on the art. I really love the battle UI and the aesthetic of the world in general. The style kind of reminds me of Legends of Arceus, and I really like it. When you get around to playing, definitely make sure to take the time to admire the art because it's just genuinely super well done. If you couldn't tell already, I would definitely recommend you to check out this hack. I'm gonna talk about my personal experiences playing a bit more, so this is kind of the end of the TLDR. Recordkeepers has a Discord, and that's probably the best place to keep yourself up to date on the latest patches and info and stuff. But if you want more content about the latest Pokemon fan projects, you should totally consider subscribing to my channel. So if you're still here, hi, thanks for staying. I had a lot of fun with this hack, and I've said it a couple of times now. I think I'll start with talking about the story that the game has going on. I really appreciate it when developers are able to write easy to follow, engaging dialogue and interesting plot points. I say this often, but sometimes ROM hacks and fan games suffer in the writing department in my opinion, but that's all subjective obviously. I'm not a huge fan of existentialism and military conflicts in the context of Pokemon. I can just open up my phone and look at social media or read the news headlines if I want that experience. Recordkeepers touches on these ideas a bit in the notes that you take once you complete each simulation, but it's just a nice little read that doesn't make you feel terrible about the state of humanity. I like the story about Lugia the best. The lore crafting was really creative. You learn that in this universe, Lugia was like a godlike figure that was revered by the people it watched over, but the safety Lugia provided made the humans complacent, so Lugia made a test for them to remind them of their mortality and how grateful they should be for their situation. Like, that's just such a fun concept. And since I really did like the writing style, I wish the lore tied in a bit more with the battle simulations. Besides the plot setup that Tiana is taking notes for the library, there's really nothing else that drives forward the story outside of finishing the simulation boss and unlocking the lore in the library. Like, the lore you unlock directly relates to the bosses you fight at the end of the simulations, but I wish there was more of a link as to why we're fighting the mini bosses. It would be a super nice bonus to have a motive elaborated on by the lore as to why we're taking on the elemental birds, for example. This is all just me wishing there was a bit more to the story because I really like the concept, not because there's anything wrong with it. I was also a bit unclear how to unlock the alternative endings, which adds additional lore to the notes. It was said that there are true and false endings and it depended on how many bosses you defeated, but that wasn't really explained in the hack itself and I'm still confused. As for the main battle loop and mechanics, I really enjoyed them. I can't explain how nice it is to have access to something that has a reasonable variable difficulty. I didn't feel like I was lobotomized trying to make my way through the different battles, although at times I did feel gaslit by the mechanics. I was genuinely tweaking when Wishcash took damage from an electric type move, but once you learn that there are no type immunities, you kind of get over that. Normally I would be not so happy about that kind of a feature, but because of the way stats work, it's really not that big of a deal. I didn't find myself taking absurd amounts of damage from moves I should be immune to normally, so it was just more like to me. Something I did have a bit of an issue with is that there's no documentation. I say that often, so it's definitely not unique to this project. I would want some notes on the new moves and abilities that have been added. When new things are created, I just really want to know what they do. I understand it takes away from the shock factor, but I think it should be available to those of us who don't really mind that. Especially if you're not save scumming, it could be really detrimental if you don't understand the mechanics of the simulation boss's ability. And also kind of related, but not really. It was kind of a learning curve for me that some Pokemon know signature moves of other Pokemon. I ended up camping on Pokemon DB because I definitely didn't know those moves base damage or additional effects off the top of my head. Definitely a personal thing, but the atypical movesets are definitely a feature of this hack. Kind of related to the relation, but I wish that there was a stack tracker so I could see exactly how many of each buff or debuff either me or my opponent has. Kind of like it is in Pokerogue, because there's so many buffs and debuffs being thrown around, it's kind of difficult to get an idea of exactly how much and how long. I think something like this would ruin the surprise surprise factor, but like I just mentioned, I don't think some of us would mind all too much. If I'm in a really long battle, it would be extremely frustrating to lose because I can't keep track of just how debuffed I am. And similarly to how you can turn the UI off for what move your opponent is going to use next turn, I think it would be fair to be able to turn off something like a stat tracker. So with all these buffs and debuffs that can be thrown around, I think it's a good time to mention something that I think is a bit more of an observable flaw. I hesitate to call it a flaw. Sometimes these battles can take a really long time to complete. Since the hack was first released, the devs actually pushed an update that allows you to speed up battles within the game itself rather than through your emulator. It's great that they listened to what the players were saying and implemented a new feature. I personally still think that because of the stalling that occurs between rounds, especially at the end with the simulation bosses, it does still take quite a bit of time to finish battles. I'm not really familiar with difficulty hacks or anything, so I'm not sure if this is a common thing. It also may be a skill issue, but certain battles took me easily over 10 minutes to complete. So if you go for a full safe run, it may take you upwards of 3 hours to complete if you don't speed up emulation. I don't think they necessarily need to address this, and they kind of already did by adding a speed up function, but it's just something that wore me down personally. Sometimes with the different status effects, especially with some bosses applying multiple stacks of dot, one turn can take a really long time to complete. But like all the things I just talked about aside, Pokemon Recordkeepers is a really well executed battle simulator. There's a ton of replayability, and you for sure will get tons of hours of gameplay from it. Even if you're not a complete expert on competitive gameplay, you'd probably still be able to enjoy this even if you're slightly familiar, which I think is an amazing thing. I cannot say enough times how nice it is for variable difficulty to actually be variable. In terms of replayability, you can on your trainer card see how many times you've beaten certain simulations and on what difficulty. And then there's always the drive to see what lore there is to unlock. The battle mechanics are top tier, they're unique and well executed. So if you're looking for something that will scratch that strategic part of your brain just a bit, you should totally check out this hack. I'll leave a link to the Reddit thread down in the description so you can go and see for yourself, which you should totally do, by the way. Now, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video and stick around to the end. If you're not subscribed already and you made it this far, you totally should hit that subscribe button. I make all different kinds of Pokemon content and I love talking about all different kinds of fan projects. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you can know when I post a new video. So yeah, I hope you have an amazing day and I can't wait to see you again next time. Okay, bye.